I've been quite vocal already on streams and in videos about my like for Bloomburrow, especially when compared to Thunder Junction or Karlov Manor in terms of its theming and its flavour. I've been the first to admit that I'm not really familiar with Red Wall and other similar animal magical properties like that, and thus the world might seem more fresh and original than that of cowboy hats and detective fedoras. I've gone into that in great detail in another video. I'll link to it in the description of the cards if you want to hear me talk about it from that angle, the tropification of Magic. But as I've played a little bit of Sealed now with pre-release and a bit of Draft, and then played with the cards in, albeit 100 card singleton formats, Gladiator and Dual Commander being the two formats that I've played the most of recently, and Brawl, I guess. But I found myself pleasantly surprised that several of the cards are good enough to see play in those formats without them dominating those formats. An anecdote to explain what I mean: I recently lost a game of Dual Commander, and I was trying to assess what I had done wrong in that particular match. And I looked at the board, I wish I was recording it, but I looked at the board. My opponent's commander was Felia, who was from Modern Horizons 3. They had an Urza's Saga in play. They had an Esper Sentinel in play, they had a Static Prison in play, a couple of planes, and them Flickering of Solitude had well and firmly absolutely fucked me. Other cards were in the bin and similar, but basically our board states were, I had several cards that were, you know, at least 5 years old, and my opponent had, I think there's 5 or 6 Modern Horizons 3 cards on board. I think Astrolabe was in play as well. Yeah, that's kind of wild, right? Now, that's not the only reason I lost that game. There was choices that I made, mulligan decisions, hell, even the cards that I chose to play compared to my opponents and the deck that I chose to play as well. It's a very derpy Aristocrats Judith deck, which is just not good enough to compete. Either way, though, there are games of Magic sometimes that I lose where I laugh at the fact that I'm trying to play things that aren't from Modern Horizons, because a lot of formats right now feel like block constructed Modern Horizons. So it's nice in a way to have a set go by where there are clearly some powerful commanders. Balin or Bria are both very, very strong and very unique in what they do, amongst many other good and fun legendaries like Zoraline or Wick. But they aren't things that are completely nuts or busted. They're pushed like modern Magic cards are. We live in a world of post-fire design where things aren't as pushed as they once were, but legendaries are pushed. Let's face it, let's be real, right? Everyone's forgotten about Voja, but Voja is a prime example of that with modern Legends. But I actually find it like a breath of fresh air that the Legends pour into the formats that care about them, Dual Commander, Brawl, and Commander. Meanwhile, other formats get a handful of toys, and then we move on whilst playing a little bit of Limited, maybe Standard is affected, and the Eternal formats can breathe a sigh of relief that they aren't getting torn apart from the inside out by an absolute clusterfuck of 7 dozen cards that are now complete and utter staples that you have to play in order to play those formats. It's just refreshing that that's not the case. Before we jump too far into the video, this video is brought to you by whatnot.com. If you use a link in the description below, you get £10 or $15 off your first purchase on Whatnot, which is a live streaming auction website. I stream on there twice, maybe even 3 times a month. I'm streaming for the next 2 or 3 Thursdays, I forget how many, on the Whatnot app. Follow the link in the description below, get signed up, get your money off, and bookmark my shows. Come hang out. We have giveaways, auctions, and sales of cards that have been signed. I'll see you over on whatnot.com. And once upon a time, that was how Magic worked. That sets would drop, because nothing really avoided Standard. Everything went through Standard into Modern, barring Commander product that went straight into Legacy. That's where this started to creep in, I guess, when Trinity Nemesis first arrived. But for the most part, the average set would have some outliers in power level that might make some impact in Modern or Legacy, and then we'd move on. And that was nice. The tension there, I guess, is the argument of power creep versus longevity. The idea that in pushing the power level of Magic cards to make them more exciting and more playable, and thus invite people to buy packs and chase those rares in record numbers, which all of the Horizons have done, by the way. And we don't know the Modern Horizons 3 sort of narrative yet, but Modern Horizons 2 was the best-selling set of all time. That's why we keep getting the fucking things. But in chasing that high, we in some ways desensitize ourselves around it. Everything else feels so lackluster and poor by comparison. In some ways, like I've said, it feels refreshing that they are so lackluster and less powerful by comparison. But the term power creep is a weird one, because creeping is often considered a slow and gradual progressive thing, and that's kind of how power creep is meant to work in essence. To explain power creep, in not just in Magic terms, but in game design terms. It's the idea that sometimes you have to reinvent the wheel. There isn't always new design space to go to, and thus you must go back and make more exciting and thus more powerful versions of things that have come before. Splashy effects, or things that players will chase to obtain through the progression systems within your game, or through monetary means if you are a pay-to-win system, or if you're a card game like Magic, which is somewhere in the between. We're not going to get into pay-to-win today, okay? But the idea of power creep is that you keep it steady, you keep it sustainable. You plod along slowly but surely, and over 30 years, you don't creep Savannah Lions so far that Savannah Lions is completely unplayable. Okay, that's not true. We have gotten to that stage now, but it took like 20 years to get there. If you don't go at a gradual pace, you kind of burn the field upon which you're playing. You run out of road to go. Where do you push things other than creeping the already power crept? And then you get into that exponential curve, which I think Magic is kind of in at the moment, of outdoing itself 2-year upon 2-year horizon set. Huge swaths of the game just aren't valid in the older formats because they just aren't as good as the stuff they keep creeping. Power creep, when it's creeping, is kind of correct, and an inevitability of creating new content for your game, new resources for players to play with. The problem is when power creep curves upwards exponentially to the point that we get into an unsustainable rhythm of power creeping. It's not quite creeping at that point, but it's still power. And Modern Horizons is very much that. Every 2 years, the Eternal formats like Legacy or Modern, which technically isn't an Eternal format. The moment I mention that on Twitter, somebody pushes their glass up to their nose and says, well, actually, and I'm just like, shut the fuck up. We all call it Eternal, no one cares. But those formats are transformed overnight, dramatically. And then your other formats that feed off the same card pool, which is all formats, right? Your Brawls, your Dual Commander, your 100 card singletons like Gladiator or Canadian Highlander, all of the other fun stuff that I've moved to get away from the fucking dire circumstances we have in Modern and Legacy right now. Those formats are also affected, but the best in class things in those formats is the power creep. Although I think these cards are less obnoxious in 100 card singleton formats because there isn't the consistency of someone playing 4 copies of Ragavan, or 4 copies of Murktide Regent, or 4 copies of Grief. You just see them on occasion. And this thing that I'm leveling at Bloomburrow for being an example of how I want Magic to be, this idea that we're going to get some cool and interesting designs, but it's not an entire set that absolutely slams into us, breaks the back of Magic, and slices out the legacy from which the game has grown, that compliment that I'm giving it can be leveled at other sets too. Both Thunder Junction and Karlov Manor were similar. A lot of standard sets in recent years have been similar. Ixalan being another example. Plenty of interesting and cool designs that are playable in places, but they don't redefine Magic overnight and become the de facto best thing to do. I guess the difference is that I liked Ixalan's setting, I liked Bloomburrow's setting. I think Thunder Junction and Karlov Manor didn't stick the setting and theme, even though mechanically they do fit to this. There is an argument that Karlov Manor was perhaps a little bit underpowered, but to be honest, I'll take a couple of underpowered sets with interesting themes over Modern Horizons just punching me in the gut every 2 years. I think you need to have a respect to the game's legacy and not power creep out everything and anything you can at all times. Pushing old archetypes to the side or making old cards just absolutely unplayable. Cryptic Command is a victim of that. It's a card that I spoke about in a video or a short or something recently, or it might have been on my Discord server, and people were just mocking me like the old man that I am for suggesting that Cryptic Command was playable. I guess it's fringely playable in singleton formats, but beyond that, it'll just never see play again. It has been outdone in every single capacity by multiple cards for Modern Horizons sets. But Modern Horizons will keep on coming, and I think that they have to do what they've done like this. They could make Modern Horizons in some ways like they have done with Bloomburrow or with Ixalan. The Lord of the Rings set is probably a good example of this. It went straight into Modern, and many people didn't really understand the reason why. The reason why was money. Modern Horizons sold very well, so they're now getting pressure to do that with other things. That's why we're getting this going into Modern. I assume Final Fantasy or Marvel will go into Modern as well, if not both of them. I don't think that's officially announced yet, but I would not be shocked or surprised if that's the case. But even with that said, the Lord of the Rings sets were much more conservative in terms of power level, but gave us a very good draft format with lots of cool and interesting designs. I do, however, have to admit every time I say this, that there were a couple of outliers, namely 2, These cards are absolutely fucked on so many levels. These feel like Modern Horizons cards. In many ways, people joked, myself included, that Lord of the Rings was going to be Modern Horizons 3, or in this case, with retrospective, Modern Horizons 2.5. I think that joke doesn't really have that many legs because the majority of cards in those sets are not obnoxious and they just fulfill new interesting roles, like the land cycling troll and Lorien Revealed and similar. Sauron's Ransom is a very reasonable Magic card that I'm glad exists. Meanwhile, the One Ring and Orcish Bowmaster will continue to cause problems in multiple formats and have conversations about how good they are, how broken they are, how could they have happened, should they be banned. That will happen until they're long forgotten and power crept out by Modern Horizons 6 or 7 once we get there in a decade. And if they aren't willing to treat Modern Horizons 4 like they do a Bloomburrow or an Ixalan, then in reality what they could do is not dump all of this stuff in one set. This is actually not going to work because I'm suggesting they remove the product from the release schedule, and that is something they definitely will not do because it makes too much money. But it makes sense that the cards that are in Modern Horizons are spread out across 2 or even 3 years, preferably, of time. To clarify, I love a lot of Modern Horizons cards, but when they all dump all at one time and immediately jump the power creep, not just at a curve, but at like a sudden jolt in power level to all of Magic, to every format that they touch, that is a detriment to the longevity of the game. The reality is that if all these interesting cards, and there's a lot of them, were spread out over 3 years of normal sets, those sets will be perceived more favourably by the community and by the audience as a whole, and also the game's power creep will be more gradual. It'll be an on-ramp. And also if you do it over 3 instead of 2 years, you end up with a slowing down of the current creep, which, I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit worried about where it goes in future. Bloomburrow felt fresh in its setting and its lack of irreverence as well. There was a lack of bad humour, dare I say it, that we saw in things like Karlov Manor and in Thunder Junction. Again, all of that I talked about in the theme video. That, plus an interesting and new setting, a world that felt like we were jumping somewhere different. Outlaw Junction almost achieved that, but got, bogged down by the need to have lots of member berries references to characters we already knew. And on top of all of that, a fun, limited environment. I've only drafted it like twice and played Sealed 3 times, but so far I've just found it deeply enjoyable and not obnoxious. And then I'm playing constructed formats and I'm not seeing cards from the set just beating the living shit out of me as I resolve a card from a couple of years prior that has been power crept out. I just think this is how Magic has been in the past and should be going forward. And for the love of God, I hope they learn this for Modern Horizons 4, but I just don't think they will. In some ways, or many ways, Bloomburrow has reminded me of what I liked about the average Magic set release. And it makes me more excited for Dustmourn, a setting where the theme is very exciting for me. I love horror fiction. However, I do also acknowledge that there is a potential pitfall there where we're going to have horror fiction, but we're going to fall into like just very shallow references and jokes about said fiction. We had that with the Old West and Outlaw Cowboy stuff too. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you agree with the sentiment that this was fresh in more ways than one? A breath of fresh air that feels like old Magic sets, both on a thematic and a power level front? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you like Warhammer, I've got a Warhammer channel too. I'll put that card on screen now as well, so you can subscribe over there if you want to hear talks like this about Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar. See you in the next one.